We are really talking about the future and some of the most incredible technology that humanity has built over the last decades. And our general focus is going to be on the notion of how new technologies, and autonomous ones at that, are taken up broadly in society, and as well as people become more accustomed to these technologies, how they become a part of the fabric of our cities and beyond. And hopefully, in an effort to address climate change and the like, these technologies have the opportunity to not only transform people's lives, but to transform the way that we move from a fossil-rich transportation environment into one that is at least multi-powered with different sorts of energy sources that are cleaner than we have today. I'm going to let the panelists, who are really cool, and I've gotten to spend time with them over the past weeks, introduce themselves. We have a couple of videos as we go down the line here, and then we'll dive right into some questions that I'm really excited to hear the answers to, and hopefully you will be too. So first up, Ellie, please.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Casson, and I lead the city policy team at Waymo. Waymo is an autonomous vehicle technology company. Is there anyone in the audience who is unfamiliar with Waymo? Would you mind just raising your hand? Okay. I think that makes sense, given that we have been around since 2009. We have originally we were part of Google, so we have that name recognition as part of the Google self-driving car project. And if you've spent even just a couple of days here in Los Angeles, you've probably seen Waymos on the street, or yesterday, it's not here today, but yesterday and the day before, Waymo out front. So I'm glad that folks know who we are. And as we talk, I'll share some stats that you may not know that I think have been really integral in the building of public trust, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks,
Michael.
John. Michael Proulx. I work for REGENT Craft, and I lead business development and ecosystems efforts for the North American region. What REGENT Craft is a wing and ground effect maritime vessel that floats on the water, gets up onto a hydrofoil, and actually takes off into a flight profile that we call wing and ground effect. Like I said, it's all electric, battery powered, and we fly in that flight profile because there's a significant enhancement in the efficiency of flight, because we are reducing the induced drag that is going through the propeller system. We're a company based in Rhode Island, and we've been successful so far, and we'll talk a little bit more about the coalitions that we set up here in North America, but also internationally. So super excited to be here and talk about REGENT and kind of what we're doing in this this mobility, multi-mobility space. But I do have a video. I'm going to make sure I press the right button here.
That's great. It's going to be a wild future with a little bit of a point to the future, but a look to the past before we get into our first questions. You probably know this way back when, in the 1850s, it was 1857, first elevator was put in New York. It was fully automatic, New York City, and no one got into it. They were too afraid to get into it. It was a box that moved up and down. So elevator people were put into the elevator, and elevators became accepted. It's sort of an interesting example because when they were reintroduced in the 1950s as automated, they had to be advertised by the Otises, the Cones of the world, as being safe by showing children in them and, parents with the children. And that's a very interesting sort of psychological example of a very early autonomous system, and a very simple one compared to the amazing place we've come today. And the question I'd like to start with, and maybe Ellie, you can lead this off, is the fabric of where these vehicles operate, and we'll start in the 2 dimensions on the ground first, is so broad. It's like a human driver, and it can go in many, 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 many different places under many situations. And when individuals who may have some concerns about getting into an autonomous vehicle, I read a stat that something like 40% of people have a safety issue question about them and the like. In order to bring sort of the benefits of EVs at scale like you're doing, What was the thinking along the way in order to have the consumer become more engaged and familiar with it as you were rolling the concept out, even pre-launch and then launch? Because I think that's a nice, because it's the product guys on the stage that's in market right now, and it's great having you here to talk about it. So, what was the thinking like over the last few years to get people really engaged and interested and open the door and actually get in the vehicle?
Well, I'll say you're right. We are in market, and I'll just recap where you can take Waymo today. So Waymo is operational and available to the public as a ride-hailing service, meaning same as Lyft or Uber. You can hail a Waymo on your phone using the Waymo One app. In Phoenix, where we've been now for some time, we've had a rider only, meaning no human backup safety driver like the elevator operator behind the wheel. So since 2020, we've been doing that in Phoenix. San Francisco, Los Angeles, as of Tuesday, you may have seen the news that we were operational in Los Angeles, but there was a wait list. We had tens of thousands of people on the wait list. Tuesday, we did away with the wait list. So all of you, if you haven't already, I encourage you to download the Waymo One app. And especially if you're just visiting LA and you don't live here, take a ride while you're here, and experience the technology for yourself. And I think that taking a ride is really the best way to change people's minds and to help them get over that psychological hump that you're talking about, because everyone that takes a ride, I truly have never had anyone react differently than this in the 7 years I've been at Waymo. People experience the technology, they spend 5 minutes in the car, and they realize that the car is safer than the average human driver. That and so I think it's just that's the best thing. Now that's not possible everywhere. We can't get every single person into a car.
True.
And I won't. I'll stop. But I can talk about some of the things Waymo has done when it's not possible to get someone in a car, or when someone's not ready and they need more information before they're even willing to get in a car.
We're going to go through that a little bit later. That's perfect. I'd like to take it to George for a second, because you're building something that's riding in 3 dimensions. REGENT is too, but this is higher and riskier the further off the ground you go. What is the sort of the planning? Besides, I'm sure, it's a 4-seat vehicle, right? There's always going to be people who want to be in it initially to give it a go, and maybe wealthy or tech folks or the like. But in order to make it part of the fabric of a multimodal transportation environment, how are you guys thinking about this issue of getting somebody into a vehicle? Forget whether there's a pilot or not, right, that is powered either by electricity or hydrogen and is a completely new experience above the ground.
That's a great question. I think there's similar themes with all three of us. I think is going to be safety and education. Okay. The more people learn about the product, the more they learn about how Waymo, how many cameras it has and how many angles it sees, and versus the human head looking only forward, or versus that number of certifications that our aircraft will go through over the 10 years, because it's not a drone, it's a plane. And what does that mean? And educating the public, okay, it goes 200 miles an hour, here's where it's gonna fly. We're gonna do short hops downtown, LAX. Being certified, what does that mean? It means you can use existing airports, existing helipads, because you're an aircraft, you're not a drone, right? Educating people, what else does that mean? Well, that means I'm flying above 500 feet, I'm flying at least 1,500 feet. Again, I'm not a drone, so I'm not spying and whizzing above your homes, right? So the more people learn about the product, the more they get educated. I think understand the safety of it and understand the components. You're gonna have an aircraft that's completely quiet, or you're gonna have an electric vehicle that is buzzing in your neighborhood, so it's not creating a ton of noise in your neighborhood, or an electric aircraft that's landing in neighborhoods it's going to be quieter than the neighborhoods they're going into, right? The more you educate safety, noise, and the value add to the community, whether that's noise, whether that's convenience, whether that's cost, I think the more you're seeing the adoption. And I will say what is surprising to me anecdotally, I'm not an aviation expert, the most excited folks about this, and you may have caught this in the video, are what I say like under 16 and above 60.
Yeah. Okay,
Anybody in the Air Force that's flown a plane that knows how difficult and dangerous those Air Force aircraft were versus today's technology, which is fly-by-wire, which means you press the button, it tells you the speed, direction, you're not navigating, maneuvering, there's no single points of failure. Again, similar to all of our technologies, that education of those safety elements compared to, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, you were turning knobs on your radio to get the radio right. So I think educating the public is the key.
That's great, and it is fun that it's a barbell market with the young and the old. I really like that. Hey, Michael, when you're thinking about what you're doing with the Seaglider, it's a really, it's so different. I mean, it's truly like sort of, unless you're watching, I'm joking, America's Cup, where they ride out on the on the foil, but they don't take off. It's something so new, and yet it's something that's probably much safer than most people might think, and it has some unique characteristics. Can you talk about that one and how you might be leveraging that to make it just a part of the standard transit fabric along coasts, the REGENT craft?
Right, and so the answer is very similar to what George says because we're kind of sitting in a very similar position from that perspective. I think Ellie's very fortunate. She can point to a car out there with a proven business model that she has. So it first starts, like George says, at education and safety. And what that means for us is engaging directly with the community. So we do that through these coalitions that I mentioned earlier and telling them what a Seaglider is and what it actually does. They can see that it does, in fact, sort of look like a seaplane, but they've actually never seen something fly in that close to the water in that sort of flight profile. So that's the first step in our process is engaging them and telling them exactly what it is and why it is safe. That's in terms of what kind of sensor systems we have, how it protects the environment or the animals in those locations that we're operating. And then it's also a little bit differently, the safety side. And what I mean by that is we're going through a little bit different of a certification path, and that's with the U.S. Coast Guard. So when people think of the FAA, they're pretty familiar with the rigorous standards that the FAA has, but maybe not so much when it comes to the U.S. Coast Guard and kind of how they do that. The FAA will give you a air operator certificate. We're getting a safety certificate through the U.S. Coast Guard. We're also doing that through Lloyd's Register. Same sort of rigorous process. And so we make sure that we communicate that to our stakeholders, to the community members to say, hey, this is an identical process in terms of the rigor to be approved and certified. And I think, we're just in this really cool position to kind of show off, this unique capability to plug in with the existing multimodal networks that are coming in. Do it in a unique way by utilizing a public commodity that is the water, that is the ocean front, to actually reach and touch these different places through different routes.
And it's fantastic. And one of the things that I think we just heard, and we can go into it a little further, is that the more people understand about the technology, the more leaders in terms of people who want the experience to give it a try become advocates for it, the snowball effect starts to build. I mean, just to think that, in 2007, the iPhone was introduced and we went through a whole period of what was the radiation impacts of phones. And now there's 6 billion unique phone users in the world, 75% of the world. And that's only in 17 years. So while these are bigger vehicles and there's a lot more going on, it is fascinating that this flywheel builds. And maybe one thing, Ellie, if you wouldn't mind, is sort of talking about sort of the vision, because Waymo builds drivers and software, and it does a lot of other things too in terms of bringing this ecosystem together. What's sort of the vision of the autonomous vehicle within the autonomous car, within sort of city scale transit, and how does Waymo look at that? Because I'm sure it's very different than somebody else who might be making just the physical instantiation of the car.
How do we fit into the overall transportation ecosystem?
Or how do you see yourself fitting into it? Yeah, how have you thought about that?
I will answer that, and I will just speak to one thing that you said, Michael. I agree that it's so helpful, as I said, to be able to get people in a car. That's a huge tool. We didn't always have that tool, and so the early days at Waymo, we did need to rely more on things that you guys are doing right now. It's a long road when you're introducing something new. I've only been with Waymo for part of that road, but I've seen us go from being in just a handful of places, and I would say finding communities. And it sounds like you guys are doing this, seeking out the kind of communities that are excited to be a place where innovation happens, and where they are willing to work with you as you are going from pilot stage to scaling. We're now scaling very rapidly, responsibly, but rapidly. It took a long time for us to get there, and we had really great early partners in, say, City of Chandler, Mesa, Tempe, Gilbert, these communities in the Phoenix area that were really excited to be a place where innovation was happening. So your question about
just generally, where does it, as you see the long term for Waymo, where does the autonomous vehicle end up going from the from the Waymo vision of what that is for society?
Waymo over time has looked at how our technology, like what is our business model, and where we really have decided to focus is on the development of the Waymo driver.
Right.
As you said, we develop the software, we develop the brain that does the driving, and so we actually no longer say driverless car because Waymo is the driver of the car. I'll just take your question and kind of maybe go in a slightly different direction, which is to say that I can't speak for the industry as a whole, but I know that at Waymo we are thinking about how do we integrate into these very complicated markets we're targeting, for the most part, dense urban environments that have a lot of different road users. And so we, from a tech and safety perspective, have for now a decade plus been focused on how do we safely identify, how do we consistently identify, predict what all of those different road users are going to do. But I'll just speak to what my team, the city policy team, is sort of uniquely focused on, which is how do we, from like a societal perspective, integrate with all of these different systems. How do we make sure that we are not, by bringing something to market, unintentionally decreasing the availability of transportation options by competing with public transportation. And so that's something that the city policy team focuses on. My colleague Ariel, who spoke on Tuesday, talked about a project that she launched, which is a transit, a promo where you can take Waymo to transit hubs and get a discount on your ride. And that, I'm not saying that that's a silver bullet. That's just it's a pilot. So, but we're trying to always learn, like, how can we be additive, and increase the options for people who have currently the fewest options. I will stop. I will just say that it's something we're always iterating on, and partners help us a lot, such as low vision, members of the low vision community, seniors, people who can help us think about ways that currently their transportation options are limited and that Waymo may be able to supplement.
Yeah, that's great because, truthfully, it's so exciting. You're building trust in the driver. And if the driver appears in different vehicles, you really have a very nice network effect as opposed to, just vehicle specific.
Yeah, people recognize the technology. Yeah. Oh, this is powered by Waymo.
Exactly.
Great, I feel safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think in something that you mentioned that's really unique, and maybe, Michael, you can talk about the vision again of where Seagliders fit into sort of a transportation ecosystem, is, the business model makes some difference here. It's not just the safety of the vehicle. It's how the company comports itself in the broader society, which is what you were talking about, at least I'm paraphrasing you, Ellie, through governmental interaction and not having unintended consequences, system thinking. How do you guys, at Regent, how do you think about where you fit into the broader system of general transportation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So with our range, we have a 180-mile range on end-of-life battery, and that's able to service most small turboprop markets, if you will, that are over water. And so we take the perspective of there's an immense availability of port space. There's an immense availability of unused port space that can be retrofitted for a Seaglider operation. What I mean by that is, there's already a great push to electrify the ports. Everyone's heard of blue highways and in a push to move passengers and goods via the maritime transportation system. And so as it plugs into the system, we are an enabler, an additive, as Ellie said, to take people from the road, take people from the air on those smaller routes by utilizing that marine transportation system, because it's all about the reduction of congestion, and I know that's what Joby's focusing on too. They'll be doing intercity travel and things of the like. So, as an example, Providence to Newport, that drive, depending on traffic, could be an hour and a half. At times, you could take a Seaglider and likely get there in 10 minutes, and for the cost, less of a cost than a full tank of gas. So we fit in that perspective that, we're not going to the governments and saying, hey, you build this for Seagliders and for Seagliders alone. We say, hey, you have this unused space that we know you have a potential use for in Seagliders, but now you can charge the electric forklifts at the docks or the ports. You can charge the electric cars that are coming there too. You can charge a Joby to service that region there as well. We do not care. What we care about is that the electricity is there and that we're pulling the proper amount from the grid to support the ecosystem and not
Can I ask a grid question?
Vampires, yeah.
Do you guys have the electricity that you need at ports? Are they electrified as you need them to be?
At some point, so for instance, the Miami port, that's a major cruise port. They have megawatts of power that would be no issue to us. So when we go into these markets, for instance, Hawaii, we look at different 10 harbors, 10 different ports that could potentially service the Seaglider, and we base our decision on what is available there. We can say, I don't know what the number is, half or 6 of them actually have electricity that can power a Seaglider there, or there might need to be a further investment from the government or from a private infrastructure developer to make that decision for what operation Seaglider network makes the most sense. So yes, the ports are electrified, but not all.
It depends.
It depends.
Some more than others.
Certainly.
That's a bottleneck for us too.
Yeah, well, power is going to be, and we can have a whole panel on that. So, but George, why don't
for
you take it
scale,
from your-
yes. For scale, yes. But for initial operations, no, right? I mean, I think that's this is a good example of what is our role and how we have to educate,
Yes,
right?
that's
Because
great.
until you see one Waymo or you see one electric aircraft taking off or one of these taking off, it is hard to convince the public that we need charging for 6 of these and we're going to have operations every 20 minutes. So until we have 1 or 2 of these taking off, and hat tip to LA, city of LA has got an incredibly well prepared airport when it comes to charging, as well as Van Nuys Airport, right? So DWP, the sustainability vision, the work that the city has put in long-term with LA Metro and their long-term planning with the People Mover has really anchored the airport to bring, the Tesla supercharging stations, to bring the Waymos, to bring eVTOL. And, we forget our history sometimes, and to your point of the elevators. LAX had a helipad on P4 until 2014. So just 10 years ago, they closed it down. So it's funny to come back to the revisionist history and say, can we do these operations? Is it possible? Do we have the energy capacity and do we have the infrastructure? And then you remind, we do. And then you look at the infrastructure around the ports, right? There is the potential to electrify, and why not simultaneously say there's 2 helipads and use that as a Regent landing and takeoff location, use that as an opportunity for the cruise lines, use that as an opportunity for the 40% of goods that move inland, those businesses that are coming to visit for maybe just a couple hours to do export-import work. How do we get them moving quicker? So I think it expands the ecosystem of the participants. So when it comes to the grid or other priority issues.
I think it's a great point, and I just want to tease one thing out for the audience, just from what we've heard. If you think back on transportation modes, they had different fuel sources: diesel, Jet A, gasoline. And while there's a huge issue, the largest issue in the green transition is generation in the grid, the truth is at the end of these, and yes, there's hydrogen and other things we can start to use, which we may need to for hard to abate opportunities. But electricity is electricity, and that's a really cool thing. And I'm not saying it's there where it needs to be, but these three companies could not be more different in what they're actually offering. And they are all effectively powered by the same input energy source, which is a unique opportunity from the consumer side. The more they're in a Waymo vehicle, electric car, if they have one on their own, more comfortable getting into that. Electric Seaglider, electric or hydrogen, so something really interesting in that. But something I'd like to sort of throw at you, and this one's a little, it's not a challenging question, but it's, in every technology, you generally start off smaller scale and then you build to get greater scale, not only for cost, but because often in smaller scale, the degrees of variability are more constrained and things are safer. So very, very big, an A380 plane, you put your best pilot on a $275 million plane, a Cessna has a lot less variability. Are you all thinking about, and I'm going to wait on Ellie for a second because your product is out in the market, but for Joby and REGENT, how are you thinking about the scaling issue? Because having 4 people fly around, or 16, and it's sort of independent of the power plant problem, but you start small because of physics and other issues, but at some point you have to get bigger to have business model and societal impact. So maybe George, just because you ended up, and then we'll come to Michael on that, and then I'll have a follow-up for Ellie. Could you talk a little bit about going from 4 to more, or is 4 enough in the craft?
The current design of the aircraft is to move 4 passengers, right? So I think, and the idea is to be doing short hops in congested cities like LA, like New York, where you can take it from JFK to Manhattan helipad and get to Wall Street in Manhattan on Wall Street in 10 minutes versus an hour and a half, which is what it takes now. Or downtown LA to LAX in 9 minutes to 10 minutes, which again, these are door-to-door, embark, disembark timelines versus I don't know how long it takes now. It's anybody's guess from downtown LA to LAX. It really doesn't.
Maybe
so
2 hours
at least having some
point.
confidence that it takes 10 minutes in an aircraft. But I think to your point, this is going to scale up. We are currently building 1 aircraft a month at our facilities in Marina. A year ago, we were building 1 aircraft every 3 months, right? So I think our goal is to have hundreds of these aircraft in market operating. But the reality is we're not eliminating congestion. What we're doing is we're giving you the option to say, if you need to get from Burbank to Torrance at 4 o'clock, you can do that in 15, 10 minutes. If you need to go pick up your kid at a soccer game, or you need a medical appointment, or you have to leave work, it's an additive transportation option. But at scale, this really does transform the way we see our communities and our existing infrastructure. Because if you do have 3, 4, 5 of these aircraft, 3 or 4 or 5 of these nodes, and you've got about 10 aircraft, those are multiples of routes that you could be doing in between those. And the anecdote to this is, if you build 1 mile of rail, you go 1 mile. If you build 1 mile of bus line, you go 1 mile. If you build 1 mile of airstrip, you see the world. So each one of those nodes is not a singular node. So if you have a node downtown, Santa Monica, LAX, and then you add 3 more helipads, there's a ratio in math economics I'm not going to do right here, but that's multiples of nodes, not just 6 routes that you're running. So I think at scale, that will prove the case, and our goal is to not charge up the plane long and to do these 20-minute charges up flights.
Right. Michael?
Yeah, in terms of physical scale, of course, you saw in the video that we started with the prototype, the 18-foot wingspan prototype. We're scaling into the 12-passenger version that we're calling the Viceroy, and we're a much larger craft. We fly in that unique flight profile, so we can carry more useful payload, more passengers, 12. So really the idea behind that is that we were able to reduce the cost per passenger per mile, so around that 25 to 30 cents of cost per mile. I want to be clear about that. And so we are going to scale into 100 passengers, so we're using each of those prototypes, the 12 passengers, to inform the build of the next larger design. So when we look to the market for our operators, they're looking at routes that have high demand. So if they want to do 6 to 7 round trip routes of 12 people, that might make a lot of sense for them to have 1 to 2 Seagliders. And we see an opportunity there to start to start there to really make them see the value of just those one or two, and then eventually scale into a much larger operation. And it's easy to do from the perspective of you just 1 to 2. You need a dock. And you need a charging station. You know, you can kind of get into the numbers later about the cost of scaling when you get a larger operation of, say, 6 to 10, and then maybe even the 100 passenger here in the future. So, you know, from our perspective, we want a high traffic count, high demand count to take those larger 100-mile, 150-mile routes. And, you know, that's why we target the airline operators. That's why we target the ferry operators. We're not looking to replace that service. We're more looking as sort of a value-added service to those ferry companies. You know, they can carry hundreds of passengers. But, hey, do you want to get there faster? Maybe even pay a little bit more. You can do that now with a Seaglider when it comes to market.
One thing to add on to that, though, it's interesting the evolution of the aircraft that you're talking about. So, for example, Joby, we now flew a hydrogen aircraft 500 miles, and we took the exact same plane that puts 4 passengers, got rid of all the seats, put a hydrogen fuel cell in there, flew it 500 miles. Now, what does that mean for the future? I think what's interesting about all of our technologies is the flywheel that gets created from the innovations that we're doing to utilize these for other technologies or other growths, because hydrogen makes sense if you're doing large-scale travel, but not 4 passengers. But it does make sense if you're doing from here to San Francisco, and you can fly for, you know, an hour, and you can put 100 people on a plane if you have that large enough space for that fuel. So I think you'll see that come through Waymo, you'll see that come through REGENT, the sort of new technology and applicability based on the innovation and research as we come to market.
I think that's a great point too. If you think about, let's pretend we were, you know, behind a screen and you didn't know the companies that were here. Whether the companies that are here in 10 or 20 years, and I'm not suggesting they won't be, but the very fact of what you're doing is building a network of, basically a systems network of sensor to community to control to manufacturing. We don't even know what the next level of innovation that will come off of that. And so I think that's really exciting, because one of the big questions is, how much governmental expense goes into, you know, helping to make all this happen? I don't mean direct subsidy. I mean just, you know, the regulatory environment, the control systems, the approvals and all that. But if you look at it as building an ecosystem and a new type of modality, which hopefully can be more equitable, can transport larger numbers of people than, you know, very small craft, it is really the beginning of like 2007 when the first iPhone came out. I really like that point. Ellie, and we're gonna have about like 5 or 6 minutes of questions at the end, so we have a few more minutes to talk here. In terms of Waymo, can you give us like just the general thought process of what's happened, and I know it's different in different states, about how you've worked with regulators and all the other constituents to bring this incredibly complex, though very exciting, truly safe and transformative technology. But boy, that must have been a bear. And I think there's, you know, there are resonances for each of the panelist companies. What was that journey like?
Well, it's an ongoing journey. It's
What's that journey like? Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever going to end. I think that as you know, you mentioned the cost to government in regulating and in ensuring that these technologies are safe. I mean, that is part of the responsibility of government, right? Like as these new technologies develop, government responds by saying, okay, this is now also part of our portfolio. And I call that out just because sometimes I think that there's this sense between the public and private sector as though we're like a nuisance, not to be like a little spicy, but just to say like, we're bringing exciting, good things to market. And yes, then there's a relationship that develops with the public sector where, you know, we're offering something, government is ensuring that it's safe for consumers, but that's not a bad thing. And so I find that attitude sometimes within the public sector of the burden put upon the public sector. I'm like, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? That
Truly,
that's
yeah.
part of your job.
Yeah.
So anyway, the process began long before I joined. Involves many people. That's also, I think, something that I like to call out for folks in the public sector who perhaps haven't worked for a company, a tech company or private sector company, is just how much, like how many human hours go into producing all of the information that is needed for the public sector to make sure that we are operating to their regulations, their requirements. So I share that for the purpose of saying, like, I think sometimes there's a request for, especially at this conference, we hear a lot about data. We need more data. Just do remember that those requests require a lot of work be done to generate it.
Software team. And
so be sure that you know what you're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
If not, you don't need to know specifically what data you're asking for, but to what end, like for what purpose, so that the time spent generating it for you is time well spent. Tell us what you're trying to solve for, as opposed to perhaps saying, give us all of your data, and we may be able to provide you with exactly what you need more efficiently and strategically. So, I mean, there's so much that I could share about the history of how we've been regulated. I think I can stop there, but
a good
those are a
sense.
few kind of thoughts, not comprehensive answers.
Perfect. I think we're going to go to questions in a second, but just in case everybody has to leave right after, a framework popped into my head while you guys were talking, and you could just say sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, which is effectively it's a triangle of innovation industry is one angle, the other is government and regulation, and the third is social systems, which are people, communities, and the like. The shorter the legs of that triangle, the better they're working together. In my example here, the more transformative, or maybe they're far away. But is that general 3 points sort of for people who may not know your industry as well? Is that a thumbs up? Is that okay?
Thumbs up until the technology and the community are really short, and then the gut regulation part is really long.
Fine.
So I don't know how the triangle looks.
It's a weird triangle. It's a isosceles triangle,
Too
whatever
short,
they call
yeah,
it. But
too short legs.
But that's great, because that's an interesting framework in systems thinking across almost everything. So we have 5 minutes. We have 3 incredible panelists, and it's your time to ask a question. My eyes are still okay, and I can see. But we probably need someone to hand a mic. Do we do it with the mic? I'm looking to our team. I can take the mic around. Here. I see you.
All right.
Take my mic.
How are each of your companies approaching this from an equity perspective to ensure that all communities and individuals can utilize these new types of technology irrespective of their income, class, et cetera?
I'm gonna, Ariel, do you want to talk about the CAP program, or? So we have a pilot that's looking at the question of how pricing and how partnerships with affordable housing developers and nonprofits that work with different communities can ensure. We honestly just need to learn about at what price point does this service become a true tool for mobility that's available to people below a certain income level. So education and partnerships are part of the answer there. And then we work really closely with city level officials who are very explicit with us about, you need to make sure you're serving this neighborhood. They should not be last. They should be part of your initial rollout. We are noticing your boundaries end here. Can they end here? So partnerships with elected officials who know their community, and transportation officials, et cetera, far better than we do, who can advise us on making sure that the territory is one that is economically diverse.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer. And we have somebody now, so pick somebody, since I won't be the bad guy then.
Thank you. Question for Ellie. What does it take for Waymo to go national?
Time, money, and because think about our business, we're super actual, like, physical capital intensive, right? We need vehicles, so partnerships with auto manufacturers. There's a huge and important part of our company is the team that works on our contracting with OEMs to secure hundreds of vehicles that we then retrofit with our technology. A lot more than that, but I would say we are starting to hit that hockey stick in terms of the tech being ready and public buy-in. So now it's about bringing the cost down and bringing it to more markets. And, of course, getting states to make sure that their laws are ready to accept us when we come to town.
I do want to also tackle the question on the equity, because I think what is interesting is on the question of the traditional elements of equating equity are no longer applicable, right? Because before it was, well, how loud is this going to be in my neighborhood? Is the bus stop going to be cluttered? Is the bus stop going to be polluting? Is the train stop going to be at my exit? Well, if you have a zero emission, quiet aircraft or car, those calculations are no longer relevant, right? So the calculus changes. What we're looking at is the plane, the pilot, the passenger. So we're going to need 3,000 pilots. We're going to need to train them. So we're going to start up a pilot academy, which we now already have, where we're doing 700 on-the-ground pilot academy training, launching a partnership with the Fly Compton Foundation to, again, train the 3,000 plus pilots. So you're not going to have a Waymo driver, but you're going to need an eVTOL pilot. So in addition, I think it's seeing that whole ecosystem, right? So we're looking to bring you a flight for the cost of an Uber Black to get from downtown to the airport. That's about $4 to $6 a mile, so you're talking $60 to get to the airport. But there are people that have never flown on an airplane because of the prohibitive cost of a plane, or been on a helicopter because it's $1,500, and we're talking $60 to get you for 5 minutes. So I think it changes the question of equity and how we value the workforce, the plane, the ecosystem, the fact that we have underrepresentation in our aviation, and the fact that pilots can't retire because they don't want to be doing long legs. So I think it changes the conversation when we talk about the equity point.
It's great. Well, we're down to a minute, and I really want to thank our panelists, and I want to leave you all with something that I heard today, which is that each of these companies is reinventing a complete category of transportation from the ground up with breakthrough innovation, and they're doing it at the interface between social, as we said, government, and the technology itself. A critical thing that you all in the audience is interested in, sort of the multimodal, equity-enriched future of transportation for the benefit of our climate, our planet, can get out there and do is make sure that when you're working within that triangle that we talked about, that you're passing along best practices, because this ecosystem type of work has rarely happened at the scale and the speed ever before in the history of what we're doing, where there's human safety involved. I mean, in software and other places. And there's very, very little in the world out there today on how to best affect a public-private partnership. Actually, these companies and other ones like them will know more about that than the academic literature and the like. But we need more of that to speed the process along for the right types of technologies delivered for the benefits of individual communities and society, and most importantly, so it doesn't all burn up, to reduce fossil emissions, broadly. And I think what we're seeing here is an incredible start of a new generation of how we think about our societies as systems. So hopefully you've enjoyed it, and let's give a huge round of applause for our amazing panelists.